This is another over-the-board classical game that I played recently. So this was against a 1700 rated player, and I thought there were some pretty instructive points to it. So let's just jump right in. So we had d4, e6. So this is a pretty flexible approach for black. He can still look to play a queen's gambit declined if I go c4, or he could look to play a Dutch if I go c4. And if I go e4 here, the game would get taken into a French with pawn to d5. So this is a pretty flexible approach for black. I went knight to f3, which is also a flexible approach, not really committing to anything too severely. So he goes knight f6, and then I go c4. So pretty standard stuff. He goes d5, I go knight c3, and we're back into a queen's gambit declined. And after pawn to c5, we're going to enter a semi-Tarrasch. After c takes d5, knight takes d5, e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3, and then the center gets liquidated a little bit. It becomes more clear what the structure is going to be. And then bishop to b4 check, and then bishop d2. And I've played this position many times. Generally, black will just play bishop takes d2, and then queen takes d2, and it's a pretty calm position, I'd say. White is slightly better, but it's very difficult to prove. But he goes queen a5 here, which I was not a move that I'm not really familiar with. And it looks like rook b1 is the best move here, but I couldn't quite come up with that over the board. Just because it's a little risky, so I just played something that I knew would be relatively natural, and I just played bishop to c4. The bishop generally either gets developed to d3 or c4 in these positions, and I really just wanted to develop my bishop and look to castle and get a pretty decent position. And black goes b5 here, and this is a pretty reasonable move. I mean, it makes sense. He wants to move his b pawn, which allows his bishop to come out to b7 or a6. But he does it with tempo because he hits this bishop on c4. So I have to decide where I'm going to retreat my bishop to. And I choose to put it on b3, which is maybe a slight inaccuracy because it's probably better on d3 since it defends e4. But I do like the bishop on this diagonal, where it is currently. And I did see that after bishop to b7, I can simply just castle here. So this is kind of a key idea here. The idea being bishop takes e4 will get black in all kinds of trouble. Against bishop takes e4 in the game, I was planning knight to g5, which would result in a pretty good position for white. It's roughly +4 for white, but the engine finds another move that I didn't even see in the game, which is queen to e1, which is a lethal move. If you take the bishop on d2, I take your bishop on e4, and then I'm hitting that rook in the corner, and you can't really do anything about that. So that would be winning. So I didn't even see that queen e1 move in the game, but we didn't enter bishop takes e4. My opponent realized that playing bishop takes e4 would be too dangerous, so my opponent simply just castles. At this point, I just trade bishops and then play queen to e2. This might not be the most pressing move. I guess it would make some more sense to play d5, but I was a little bit hesitant to create that isolated queen pawn so early, even if it is a pass pawn. I kind of wanted to bring my rooks to the center first, so I just played the calm move, queen to e2. So this is just looking to bring a rook to the d file, and it also lends support to the pawn on e4 since he was threatening to take it now. So he goes knight d7, I go rook b1, nothing crazy here, and then after queen to e7, basically black is saying you can't take this pawn on b5 because I'll take your pawn on e4, and I say okay, that's fine. I just simply go rook f to e1, just lend some more support to e4. Maybe I can think about taking this pawn on b5 now. Rook to b8, bishop to c2. So this is kind of, I'm kind of shuffling around right now. I don't really have an exact plan of what I want to do here, but I kind of want to probe black, maybe make him make some weaknesses. So after bishop c2, I was threatening to take on b5 with the rook, so he plays b4 to defend this pawn. And then I go queen d3. I'm just creating this battery along the b1 h7 diagonal, and potentially want him to make some weaknesses with something like g6, because I'd be welcome to seeing something like that. And he plays pawn to g6 here, and I don't mind seeing this because it creates all these weak dark squares around his king. So I simply just drop my queen back now, and now I'm hitting this pawn on b4, and I'm also threatening to potentially invade on the dark squares. So I just did a little maneuver, create a battery on this diagonal, and then once he did something about that, there's not really anything I can do on that diagonal anymore, so I simply just drop my queen back, and I retain a lot of flexibility in this case. So he goes rook fc8, I go bishop to b3, just putting my bishop back on this diagonal, since it's not really useful on this diagonal so much anymore. And he goes bishop a6, and this is just repositioning the bishop. It's on a relatively good square now, and I play pawn to e5. So this is a pretty bad mistake. So really, the idea should just be to play d5 and create this pass pawn. However, I was a little bit concerned what happens after queen to d6, and if you just sit here and blockade this pawn. But it seems like that there is a tactical possibility here that I completely missed, and that would be rook to e6. So this would have been a pretty brilliant move, and unfortunately I just did not see this in the game. And it's a tough idea to see. And the idea is that after f takes e6, d takes e6, this is just going to be a lethal problem for him. So first of all, his queen is hit, but if you play queen takes d2, I can play e takes d7 in between move, and then I can queen and then potentially take back this queen, and I would just be winning a lot of material there, but I completely missed this idea. So I was hesitant to create that pass pawn, as I thought it might be a potential weakness, but d5 would have been a much better move. e5 is not a good positional move for multiple reasons. So it creates this weak backward pawn on d4. It also gives him the d5 square to work with, potentially with a knight. The one upside is I'm looking to play knight g5, knight e4, and use this e4 square, and maybe play knight f6 or knight d6. But e5 is a weakening move overall. So he goes knight b6. He wants to put his knight on d5. I go knight g5, which was really my plan from the beginning. I want to go knight g5, knight e4, and then kind of probe him on these weak dark squares. So he goes bishop c4 here, which is not the correct idea. I think he should simply go bishop b7 and put his bishop back on that diagonal, but it is a little bit of a difficult move to find because it's a little inconsistent since he just played his bishop to a6. But he looks to play bishop c4. So he wants to trade these bishops. He wants me to take, obviously, and then he'll improve his knight or bring his rook into the game and target this d4 pawn. And he's starting to get a decent amount of counterplay over on the queen side. So I choose to ignore this, and I just go knight to e4. So I just continue with my plan as before. He goes bishop takes b3, and I go knight f6 check. So this knight f6 check I'm a little bit skeptical of. I think I should probably just play rook takes b3 right away. But I choose to throw in this check, king g7, and then I go rook takes b3. And so my idea is, okay, so he's got these weak dark squares around his king, and all his pieces are on the queen side, so I'm going to look for some king side counterplay here. So now that this rook is coming to b3, I can do an important idea here. My idea is that I want to simply do a rook lift here. So I want to just bring this rook over to h3 potentially, and maybe get some counterplay towards his king. So he goes knight d5. This is a good move because he wants to trade these knights. It's possible I could do something like rook f3 to defend this, but I don't really want to put the rook there. I'd rather just avoid the knight trade, so I go knight e4. Because I don't want to trade these knights, since I think my knight is pretty well placed. And his king is the weaker king. And generally, you don't want to trade kings, or trade pieces when your opponent has a weak king. So I simply go knight e4. I still have ideas with knight d6, maybe knight g5, and it really just keeps the flexibility here. So my opponent goes a5, which is a good idea. He should really start trying to mobilize this queenside majority. He's got this 2-on-1 queenside majority over here, so if I'm not going to be mating him on the king side, he's going to be getting some serious counterplay and will be winning in the endgame. So I need to get some counterplay towards his king at this point, so I go rook to h3. So I'm looking to Simply, right now, I'm looking to just invade. So if he doesn't do anything about queen h6, he's going to get mated. So he goes pawn to h5. There's really no other move, but I'm welcome to seeing this because he is making some concessions on the king side. And really, I don't have a whole lot to do over here on the queen side. He's got the advantage on the queen side. All his pieces are over here, and he's got the queen side majority. So really, I need to look to play on the king side where his king is weak. So g4 is the correct way to go about this. Although this move inherently is a weak move, I need to look for counterplay. And he doesn't really have any way to take advantage of my kingside weakness after doing this. If anything, this does provide a flight square for my king as well, so there's no back rank problem, as well as I'm trying to rip open his king side. I'm trying to get to his king before he can push these pawns and get a queen. So he goes h4 here. It's possible something like rook c3 would have been the better try here, but he goes h4. Trying to keep things closed over here. However, I just keep the initiative going. I'm going with f4. So I'm really trying to get my attack going here. So I'm really going to make him think about what happens after I play f5. I'm also freeing up this f2 square for my queen to come over and potentially scoop up this pawn. So I'm really starting to put some pressure on my opponent and make him really think if he has time to push these pawns. So the idea here for him, I think the only move that really maintains equality is a very tough concept. So I think he has to go b3, a takes b3, and then try and trade queens with queen b4. And I think that is really the only way to maintain some sort of equality in this position, because I am getting some serious pressure towards his king with the threat of f5 coming. But he goes rook h8, and I think this is when he starts to kind of go astray a little bit. So this does make some sense because he's lending support to h4, but I haven't even attacked that pawn yet. But I go queen f2, and and now that I'm thinking about it, I should probably consider something like f5, or maybe since he's already gone to defend this pawn, maybe now I bring the rook back over to f3 and play f5. But I go queen f2, so I'm kind of freezing his pieces here since I'm putting some pressure on this h4 pawn, so he can't really move his queen or his rook. And I really think he's got to get these pawns mobilized. It looks like knight c3 with the idea of trying to trade the knights is a potentially good idea. But he goes a4, which I think is a pretty logical plan. I think he really needs to start mobilizing these pawns if he wants to create counterplay. But I go f5. So basically this is the classic question of who's faster in this position. I'm pushing on the king side, he's pushing on the queen side, but it seems like white is sort of getting here, and now black has to be very careful. So he goes king g8, which is a move I didn't even consider in the game, but it seems like it holds things together. I think e takes f5 or g takes f5 maybe could have provided a better try, but king g8, makes sense, just to sidestep f6 fork ideas. In this position, I just choose to play f6 anyway. I saw the opportunity to potentially put his king in a box and keep his rook in the corner. So I thought that this would have some chances, especially with a knight coming to g5. I've got possibilities here. So he goes queen f8 here. So this is a pretty reasonable move, but I do want to take advantage of the fact that his king is in a box. Okay, so I played f6, and so his queen no longer defends h4. So now I can take h4. And my opponent plays the only move here. So note, in this position, I'm threatening to just play rook takes h6, queen h4, and knight g5, and that will be the ball game. So he has to be very careful here. So he plays rook h6, which is the only move. And in this position, I think you have to be pretty careful as white. And I think there's really only one move here that really goes for an advantage, and I think that's knight c5. So the idea is, one, I'm hitting this pawn on a4, but I'm also threatening this fork on d7, which would fork the rook and the queen. And so in that case, that would be devastating because his queen would be hit, but he would have to move his queen, and then this rook would hang on h6. So you really have to stop this fork on d7, and he does that by playing rook d8. And then in this position, I choose to go g5. So I'm basically forcing him to trade rooks. He doesn't really have any other choice at this point. You can't move the rook anywhere else, or else you're going to put yourself in some danger. So you trade rooks here, and then b3 is played. So once again, we have the classic question of who's faster here. I'm putting a lot of pressure on his king side, and I've gained a pawn up to this point, so I'm up a pawn right now, but black is clearly putting some pressure over here. I mean, he's pushing his 2-on-1 majority, and it's very possible that I need to be concerned about him queening at some point. So I play a takes b3, a takes b3. It's possible a3 was better, but I think after I analyzed it, they're roughly similar. So he plays a takes b3, and I think the crucial idea here for white is not to simply just take this pawn. You throw your advantage if you do that due to queen to b4. So if you can imagine knight takes b3, queen to b4 seems like a pretty reasonable move. It's possible white is still doing okay if rook to f1, but it really, I mean, I was getting low in time, and I really wasn't so sure about this because his queen is starting to get active. So something like rook f1 and then queen takes b3, it's really not like the most obvious C. So I'm mating him here, but after queen to b4, I mean, the fact that his queen is getting so active gets me a little concerned. But also, I just didn't like how after knight takes b3, my knight's kind of just not really doing anything there. It allows him to really get active, and I didn't want to allow that. So I didn't play knight takes b3. I go queen to e4. So although this isn't the best move by the engine, I think this provides me some chances. So I think black has to be a little bit careful because I am potentially threatening ideas involving knight takes e6. So he goes rook to a8, since he's going for a queen, and the question is, okay, does he have time to make that happen? And in this position, I play a very good move. We're both in relative time pressure here at this point, probably 5 minutes or less, and I uncork this move, knight takes e6, which I don't think he saw, and I don't think he was ready for. I think he probably thought that he was going to be doing quite well with this pawn and this rook, but knight takes e6 is a little bit of a shock. So the only move that holds here for black is queen to b4. You have to play queen b4, and that's an incredibly difficult move to find after a move like knight takes e6. But really, just recognizing that after knight takes e6, you can't play f takes e6. And unfortunately, my opponent just failed to see what happens after f takes e6, and he plays it. But queen to b4 would have been the equalizing move, but unfortunately, I put too much pressure on my opponent, and he finally crumbled and plays f takes e6, and now I'm winning. So queen takes g6 check is the idea, king h8, and then this crucial move, rook to e4. And then you notice that black's king is in some serious trouble here. I'm threatening rook h4 check with mate to follow, and there's not really anything that black can do about it. You can give a check, I go to f2, you give another check, I go to g3, and then I defend this pawn laterally. Black is out of checks here, and rook to h4 cannot be stopped. So this pawn is not quick enough to do anything. Rook h4 is an immediate threat, and unfortunately, it's over now. My opponent threw in the towel at this point because he realizes you can't stop rook h4. But I thought this was a pretty instructional game. Basically, out of the opening here, so we get all of these liquidations in the center. So in the end, we get this position where white has this center here. So I've got this big center, but black is super solid, and he has this 2-on-1 majority on the queen side. So basically, if I'm not going to get some sort of action with a pawn to d5 move and push the pawn and make a pass d pawn, if I don't do that or get some sort of kingside attack, black is going to be better long term because of this majority. So basically, I realized at a certain point in this game, I'd say right around this point, clearly black is looking to mobilize his pawns over here, and I realized that, especially after I played this move pawn to e5, I really have no choice but to go for a kingside attack. And it was recognizing that gave me the time to successfully conduct this attack. And I was just barely quick enough with this knight takes e6 move, and unfortunately it forced a mistake by my opponent. But really, I think in this position, you really need to find either queen b4 or queen e8, but unfortunately he cracked under the pressure here. But I thought this was a good tactical sequence to end it, a nice little knight sacrifice, and a good attack. So that's all for this game, all for this video, and I'll probably make more videos like this in the future, and I'll see you guys next time.